String. Oh my God. Oh, I look. Sorry, I'm walking the dog, so I look road as fuck. Right, today I want to talk about everything in design can be solved on a sliding scale. Am I in shot? God, sorry, I got a shot. Sliding scale. So an easy one is if you're going from, let's make this smaller, evolution to revolution, or functional to expressive. So in design, often, let's say you've got a project and you've solved the strategy. Okay, so top level, you've been briefed, you've got the client you're in, you've worked out all the strategy. Next layer after that is where you'll go into the creative. Now, often people, the thing they get wrong here is they'll go off and they'll do one route over here, one route over there, one route over here. And they might vaguely be related, but they'll be quite different territories. And that is good. There's not wrong. But I would say that's good for internal. So when you're going to your creative director, or you're going to, like, you're trying to work out what's the look and feel and what's the vibe. But when you start showing it to client, I think it can happen when you've got a project where you've sold in the strategy and you know the positioning, you know the idea. If you go really far from over here and over here, because obviously, yeah, it's graphics, but you're creating a real different aesthetic, which can kind of make it hard to sell in the strategy. So if they're like, well, how can this strategy work all the way over here and then also work all the way over there? So a nice little tip to do, which is it's used quite a lot in industry. It's nothing new, but if you haven't heard of it, you might find it of value. So I'm using the string. I'm not letting myself use the whiteboard or do visuals. Otherwise, these will never get done. So string. So instead, what you should do is have evolution on one side and revolution. And say you have three routes that go along that line. Remember that I'm holding that. The first one would be, let's say, especially if you're doing a brand refresher or a branding 2.0, you kind of take the strategy and their original logo that they came in with that was awful. You would maybe go, okay, so we're doing one step across. So when the first time they see that, it's really good for bigger companies, because then everyone in the room takes a big breath and goes, okay, so no one's getting fired. Our marketing budget's not getting cut. I'm not going to be in trouble and our CEO is not going to get pissed off. So that kind of thing. So that one would take the strategy and that would maybe dial in the key points, a really simple way of doing it, to like execute if we have to do it. Next one, and once you've seen that, everyone suddenly in the room relaxes and they become a lot more up for everything else. So then let's say that's a 1 or a 2. Let's maybe move to that 5, 6 territory on that sliding scale of 1 to 10. So then this one, you're still using the same strategy and you're building off this idea. So this idea is not completely different. You're just, if you imagine a PA system, so you've got like a bass, middle, treble, you're kind of like recalibrating it. So you're taking the ideas. So let's say it's, let's just use arbitrary words. So it's sharp and it's technological and it's an outlier in the archetype world. So you would then make things, so here maybe it's just a bold color to help it be like a maverick, an outlier. And then you've got a sharp edge thing rather than any bevels or curved beziers. I'm riffing completely. Next layer on that, maybe you start to dial. So when you recalibrate that almost bass, middle, treble, you're bringing forward. So let's say you're actually being more maverick forward or more technological forward. So that would maybe where it starts to get the tone of imagery would get ever slightly more techie, or the way in which you use the graphic language. So maybe you're building more of a brand system that's a lot more sharp and angular. Maybe there's a modular aspect to it. Then maybe if you're in the technological space, maybe you're bringing in iconography, and maybe they're treated or built in the same way, built off the logo. So that would be kind of like a slightly start to get a bit more exciting. Maybe you tune the colors up. Maybe you can do it from the verbal instead of the visual. You start to have more of an outlier. God, those words that I chose were stupid, but we'll go with it. You start to use more of an outlier tone of voice, so people are a bit more of a chipper tone of voice. So then you've got 1, 2, and now 3. That would be on that evolution revolution scale. Now this is the one where you want to kind of push it really far. So where traditionally without this setup, these two visuals or these two routes might look completely different. And then, so it'd be strategy and then those two. And everyone might be like, okay, these look really different. How can they exist with the same strategy? Because you've walked the client through these kind of top up phases, they'll be much more able to receive the information. So in the revolution phase, you kind of want to go all guns blazing, and maybe that's usually where you put like optimum level. So where everything, if you imagine that recalibration, so you've got a really chipper tone of voice, you've got really technological forward, you've got a really sharp brand system, you've got really bold colors that are positioned well. So you're going very much in a zag territory. So you're not playing it safe. You're being very much of an outlier. You're playing it using all those things to your advantage. And those three routes will look aesthetically different because there's the same idea dialed up and down to tell the certain aspect of the story, but neither of them are wrong. The big point I want to put here is it's easier to get sign off on someone saying say when than to make them say like this or that. Does that make sense? That's kind of the big crux, is if they're like, oh yeah, because often, as anyone who's ever done any creative ever, they will say, oh, I liked a bit of that, I want a bit of that, and I want a bit of that. Because designers, we can't go in with this muddled idea. We have to really be clear in our channels of thinking because that's what we're selling. But ultimately, when they do say a little bit of that, a little bit of that, a little bit of that, all three routes do have good qualities in them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the presentation. So a way to sort of retrofit or retroactively post-rationalize that, you know that feeling from the client's coming. So if you build it on that sliding scale, it's really cool and a lot easier to sell in. And then also, let's say they buy route 2 or route 3. At the next stage, back to the sliding scale, a really good one when you're starting to do rollout or when you're doing guidelines or just starting to try to understand where you want to do what and where you need to put what where. Just having a sliding scale from functional to expressive. You can change the words, but I felt that those words I've done like, I did 2 guidelines last year where I did that and they were like 4 or 5 month jobs. And those 2 words went very well. They went down in a very techie space and they went down in a very traditional space. So those words people seem to get that in the flow. So functional would be more of your content design. What do we need for user journey? This really simple stuff. So your copywriting is very more content design based, very XYZ, get them here. We're having this image. It's very much placed. It's functional. I mean, it's self-explanatory, right? It gets you from A to B and it does what it says on the tin. It gets us new leads. It gets us sales. It makes everyone happy. When you start to move along, so maybe when you're doing more awareness campaigns or you're more top of the funnel, you can be a little bit more playful. Or well, same you can do bottom of the funnel. You could also be playful, but in a different way. But either way, when you're going to more expressive, maybe this is when you start to be a bit pared back. You let the imagery talk for itself. You start to just let the brand property exist without having to have whatever imagery the brand needs, or you kind of lead with your strapline or you lead with your marketing headline, and things start to get a bit more playful, where that's where some of the ideas come in. Maybe there's some nice touch points that only really work in a playful manner. And if you just slapped on a big image with a headshot and a sign off and a logo, that would be a bit of a maybe boring execution for an out of home or whatever. And then end of the scale. So what scale are we on? So expressive. So this is when you can be really playful. So this is maybe where in your content you can do it, or maybe where this is start to bleed down into your motion principles. And that allows you to really push the brand. And it's not that they might only use it in 1 or 2 instances, or if they then recommission you to do some of the executions, there might only be 1 page in a double spread of an annual report, or it might be one of the fake ads that goes on LinkedIn that is like kind of a pseudo ad for a real ad. It's not a real ad, whatever hell is. I mean, it works, but weird. Where you're really playful and you're really kind of being bold, and that revolution space in an expressive execution as well. Because you can be revolution as a brand, have a revolutionary brand, and still have a functional execution. You could also be a evolution brand, so a very safe brand, but have a very expressive way of doing things. So with these 2 scales, you can pretty much sort of tell any story you need to do. I'm sure there are exceptions from the rule. I'm sure there are more things where you can go deeper and tactical. But if you're just doing little guidelines, or if you're just working with, I mean, that'll work right up to big companies, like 500 big companies. So yeah, sliding scales, evolution to revolution, functional to expressive. Plot it along, and then remember, it's not this or that, it's say when.